Hi everyone, and welcome to the first in a series of lessons on how to use Scratch. Now I'm sure many of you have probably used Scratch at home or in the classroom, but for the people who haven't, this week is more of an introduction, so you should find it fairly easy to follow along. So this week I thought it'd be a good idea to get Scratchy to draw us a square. Now this here is Scratchy and he's the mascot for Scratch, and we can tell him what to do by giving him instructions using the code blocks on the left. Now if all goes well, we should have a nicely drawn square by the end of our lesson. Before we start, we need to come up with a plan on what we're going to get Scratchy to do and what instructions we're going to give him. When we give a computer a list of instructions to complete a specific task, we call that an algorithm. Now the word algorithm is an important word for you to remember, as I'll be using it throughout the video series. With that in mind, there are a few things we need to think about first. I want you to think, can you name any properties or features of a square? Now, when you look at the shape on the screen, what makes you go, that's a square, and it's not a circle or a triangle or any other shape? There are particular features or properties that a square has that make it go, that's definitely a square. So, pause the video, grab a piece of paper and note down any features or properties of a square that you can think of. So, did you manage to think of any? Now I'm only going to mention 2 of the properties we need for our algorithm, but you may have more and that's great, so check with your teacher to make sure your other answers are correct as well. The 2 important properties we need for the algorithm are, a square has 4 sides and all the sides are the same length. Secondly, a square has 4 internal angles and all of them angles add up to 360. So if all the angles add up to 360 and there are 4 of them, can you work out how many degrees each of the angles are? If we take 360 and divide that by 4, because that's how many angles we have inside, we get 90. So each of the 4 angles must be 90 degrees. Now, let's bring Scratchy in for some help. Scratchy is in the bottom left hand corner of the square we're going to draw facing right. So I think it's fair to say he needs to move forward. But when we tell Scratchy to move forward, we also need to tell him how many steps to move by. We don't have a lot of space at the moment, so let's tell him to move by 100 steps. That looks like it might be a great first instruction to give Scratchy, so I'm going to write that down on my piece of paper to remember. From this point on, if we tell Scratchy to go forward again, we won't end up drawing the square that we want. So, can you think of what we need to get him to do? How about we tell him to turn left, but by how much? I've zoomed into the corner of the square to make it easier to see. If we extend the line that Scratchy's just travelled along, we end up with something that looks like this. We need to know how many degrees this angle here is. By extending the side of the square, we've created a straight line that we can use in our calculations. The angle of a straight line is 180 degrees, as shown here. When we discussed the features of a square, we calculated that the interior angles of a square are 90 degrees each. This is our 90 degree interior angle. So if we take the 90, the part of the angle that we already know, away from 180, the angle of the straight line, we get 90. So now we know we need to turn left by 90 degrees. Well, that looks correct, so I'm going to put that down on my paper as well. Now I think we need to move forward again, but by how much this time? Well, as we know, each of the square's sides are the same length, so it would make sense for it to be the same number of steps as we took with the first side, 100. Now that looks like another great instruction for Scratchy, so I'm going to write that down. I find planning on a piece of paper before we even get into the Scratch program a great way to make sure I know what it is that I want to achieve and have some idea on how I want to do it. I'd now like your help to finish the rest of the algorithm. So pause the video again and on your piece of paper copy down the instructions that we've come up with so far. I'd then like you to write down the instructions you'd think we'd need to give Scratchy to get him to complete the square. So how did you get on? Did you find that easy? If not, don't worry, I've been busy working out the steps as well and I'm going to show you what I've come up with and then we can compare. So here's my algorithm and I'm sure it looks very similar to yours, but you might not have this last instruction, the turn left 90. Without this, Scratch will be facing downwards after he's drawn the square and I want him facing right. So if we add this, it puts him back in the same position that he was in before he started drawing the square. So if everything else looks the same on yours, that's fantastic, well done. If you don't have the last turn left 90 like I have, add that to the bottom of yours so when we test our program, the end result will look the same for both of us. I'd like you to imagine something with me for a moment. As computers can follow instructions really quickly, if we get Scratchy to do the instructions that we've got on our algorithm, he'll probably move faster than Superman and it won't look like he's moved at all. So between each of our instructions we've written down on our paper, we're going to add a wait command to make sure he doesn't move at that Superman speed. I'm only going to add an instruction to wait 1 second, but that should be enough to see him draw the square step by step. You don't have to add this to your algorithm now as you might not have the space on your paper, but remember we're going to add this wait instruction between each of our code blocks when it comes to doing the program. So now our algorithm looks like this. With all the planning out of the way, let's head over to the Scratch program and do some programming. Let's give Scratcher his first instruction. Now it should already be selected, but to make sure, click on his little picture in the bottom right hand corner and he'll be blue if you have him selected. This tells Scratch that we want to add the programming blocks that we're going to select to Scratchy and not something else in our program. Looking at the algorithm we created on our piece of paper, we can see that the first instruction we need to give Scratchy is to move forward 100 steps. If we click on the motion category on the left hand side, you'll see there's a move 10 steps block in that list. We want to click and drag this block onto the middle section of our screen and let go of the mouse button. But now we have a problem that needs addressing. We want Scratchy to move forward by 100 steps, but our current code block says move forward by 10 steps. But don't worry, there's an easy way to sort that out. All you need to do is click on the number in the box, delete that and type 100 and press enter on your keyboard. Remember I said we want to add a wait for 1 second block in between each of our instructions to stop Scratchy flying off like Superman. Well, it's now time to add one. So if we click on the control category on the left hand side and at the top you'll see a wait for 1 second block. Again, I want you to click and drag the block into the main section of the screen towards the move block that we placed a moment ago. See, we get a shadow underneath the move block. Well, if we release our mouse button when we see that shadow, the wait block will automatically snap underneath the move block. That's now 2 steps of our algorithm already complete. If we look back at our list, what do we say the third step should be? Oh yes, it was turn left by 90. If we click on the motion category again, you can see we have 2 turn blocks. They don't say left or right on the block, but it does have a little arrow with one pointing left, so I'm going to select that one. Again, click and drag it to the main part of the screen, wait for the shadow under the wait block, and release your mouse button. We need to change the number in this one as well, as it currently says 15. Click on the box with the number 15, delete that and type in 90 because that's what we put on our algorithm, and press enter. Now that I've shown you the location of all the code blocks you'll need to draw a square, I'd like you to finish the program using the plan on your piece of paper. Just a quick tip before you start working on your program, don't forget the wait blocks that we said we need to put in our code. I'll leave my version on the screen for you so you can follow mine if you get a little stuck. Just remember that programming can be difficult, but you're all doing really great so far. So pause the video now and have a go at finishing your program. So how did you find that? Did you manage to finish your program? I'm going to show you what I came up with, and I'd like you to compare it to yours or ask a teacher to see if your code's correct before we move on. Now there's one problem we all have with our code. Can anybody guess what it is? How are we going to get Scratchy to start the program? Normally a great way to start our program is by clicking the green flag in the top, but when I click it, it doesn't appear to be working. I think we need to tell Scratchy to start our program when we click the green flag. And as luck would have it, there's a code block for that. If you click on the events category on the left hand side, right at the top we have a when green flag is clicked instruction block. And we need to put this at the top of our program. So click and drag when the green flag is clicked block out to the main center of the screen, continue holding your mouse and move the block to the top of the program we've created. Just above the first move 100 steps block. See that shadow appearing again? Well, if you release the mouse button, it should snap to the top of the program. Now, let's click the green flag to see our program in action. Well, Scratchy moved in the shape of a square, but he didn't draw it. Why is that? Well, Scratchy can only do what we tell him to do, and we haven't told him to use the pen to draw the square. We need to activate the pen features. You need to click on the button in the bottom left hand corner right here, and on the next screen I would like you to select the pen option. For now, don't select any of the other options as it will import stuff that we don't really need at the moment. You can now see we have a pen category on the left hand side of our screen. Pen down is a code block we need to tell Scratchy to start drawing. But where do we put it in our code? Have a think. Well, if we need him to put the pen down before he starts moving, it seems reasonable that we'll have to put it at the top part of our code. So if we click and drag the block out to the main area, remembering to keep our mouse button pressed, you'll see that all the blocks begin to separate to make room for the pen down block that we're trying to place. We want this placed just under when green flag clicked. So as soon as you see a space and a shadow appears, release the mouse button and it should snap right in there. Now click the green flag at the top of the screen and let's see what happens. Well, Scratchy's drawn a square, but I see another problem. What happens if we press the green flag again? Scratchy just seems to be drawing over our existing square and we can't see the new one being drawn properly. Problem solving is all part of programming though, so we won't let this stop us. We need to come up with a solution. Does anyone have any ideas as to what we could do? What blocks would you use to achieve your idea, and where would you put them? I'm sure you came up with lots of different answers, and I'm sure they're all great. There is often many ways to achieve what you want to do in programming, and each person will come up with a different way of solving the problem. As I'm not in your classroom today, I can't hear the fantastic solutions that you all came up with, but I can show you what I did and how I came up with the result. So my idea was, how about we delete the old square using the erase all block at the top of the pen category? But then I had to think about where I would want to put it. Well, if I put it at the end, Scratchy is going to draw the square, and when he gets to the end, he'll just delete it. Now that's not the result I want, so how about I get him to delete the old one before he starts drawing the new one right at the top of the program, and I'll stick a wait block of 1 second in there as well. Now let's click the green flag and see how it looks. That's exactly the result I was trying to achieve. Make sure your program looks like the one that's on the screen at the moment, and then click the green flag to test yours as well. Now, I have a challenge for you. I'd like you to get Scratchy to draw the square that we have, but I would like each of the sides of the square to be a different colour. The only hint I'm going to give you is that you'll need the set pen colour block, and decide how many you'll need and where they'll go. There's even a little colour selector on the block, so choosing your favourite colours is easy. An example solution will be right at the end of this video, so have a go before looking at that. Well, thank you for joining me this week with the Scratch programming. Hopefully you've had fun and it's got you thinking about the kind of stuff that you could do with Scratch in the future. Next week I'm going to show you how to take the square we've created, so don't forget to save it as you're going to need it, and make a nice shape like the one you see on the screen now. It's not difficult, but there are some new programming techniques we'll need to learn before we can do it. So see you next week.